Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development Podcast. My name is Michael Clark. I am the host of the podcast, and pleased to be joined today by Jes Kachur. Jes, thanks for coming on the podcast with us.
Thank you for having me.
For those that don't know Jes, Jes is a partner at Mercer based in Pittsburgh, where she's worked for her entire career as a pension actuary and now as an investment consultant. She's currently on the board of directors of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. Jes and I actually go way back to when we were brand new analysts working in the pension space. We met at an EA exam seminar, just ended up sitting next to each other, and we've been friends ever since. So I'm really excited to have you on this podcast and have you be able to share more of your story with our listeners.
Yeah, I wonder if we both passed our exam on that sitting.
If I remember right, well, I know I passed the first one. I know I did not pass the second one on the first try, where I think you did, if I remember right. You got ahead of me there a little bit. Um, but a couple of other interesting facts that people might not know about Jes. Being in Pittsburgh, she is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and understandably, has been going through a few rough years on that front. She loves to host family gatherings, though, with her family. She is a mom to one awesome daughter. And are you training her to be an actuary as well?
I am really trying to see if she would want to be an actuary. Yes.
Well, let's actually start there. What led you to be an actuary?
A great place to start. So I've definitely loved math, and it was a passion of mine, I would say, from early on in my life. And I was actually in high school when I learned what an actuary was through a dinner event that Robert Morris University hosted, which is where I ended up going. And they were just educating high schoolers on what an actuary was. But instantly leaving that dinner, I knew immediately that this was the career for me, and glad that turned out to be a really good fit.
I find it really interesting. The more people that I talk to, especially in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, it's not shockingly uncommon anymore to find people that wanted to be an actuary when they were in high school. But I think when you and I were coming out of high school, that was a very different story, and something that you and I had in common. I knew I wanted to be an actuary in high school as well. Um, it came about it in another roundabout way, but I think that was very unusual for our generation coming out of high school to know that they wanted to be an actuary and that was what they were going to start pursuing from day one in college. Um, so you've been a pension actuary your entire career. You've been in Pittsburgh. You've been with Mercer your entire career. For a time, you ended up leading the retirement business in Pittsburgh for Mercer. And I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. You were still fairly young when you took on that role. I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about that role and to hear about some of the things that you learned and some of the challenges that you had to face.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely an awesome part of my career. And it was something that, I did right coming in as a pension analyst and then continuing to get a little bit more growth and exposure, working with different leaders, consultants. I did have in kind of my purview of ultimate career growth trajectories at that time that I did want to get into leadership. So I started to really just vocalize that a little bit, started to just, work with some of the leaders to understand what they did and what they were doing. And really, I wanted to kind of understand more than the actuarial side, so a little bit more on the business side, and really on the people side as well, too, since that is what makes our business go. Uh, so in 2014, which, yeah, was a little bit earlier in my career, I actually did have the opportunity to step into that role that you mentioned, and it was incredible. It was a challenge, and I definitely had successes, but I certainly definitely had failures as well too. And I think what I went into that role with in terms of expectations, I came out of that role with so much more, and so much more, not just growth, but really maturity. And I think I really learned about what makes things work, finding the value, I think, in each person's skill set is a key, and then being able to get a group oriented and together and using all of those individual unique persons to be able to then kind of move the bigger picture along, right? And have everyone kind of moving in the same direction and trying to achieve a bigger goal, working with, a diverse group of team members. So it was it was a very good experience, and I am so thankful that I was able to have that.
So I'd be curious, what were your expectations going into that role? You mentioned all of these good things that came out of it and the other things that you learned, but it, I'd be curious as to what you thought you were getting into versus what actually ended up playing out.
Yeah, so maybe going back into my younger years mind, so kind of what I thought what I would get out of that is maybe more personal uh, experiences in terms of, right, as the leader, you probably are getting to go to a number of very important meetings, and getting to understand what the business objectives are, and what is going on with the people across the organization. And then what I really then kind of found was how how important it was in the relationships that you then build with each of the people on your team, right? So to get to those ultimate goals, you need a team of people that want to do well and deliver, right, for the firm and for the company, and for you maybe as a leader to then actually get there. So it was like kind of the reversal of kind of thinking up, but then success was actually from the actual team perspective.
Now these positions, these leadership positions, they're not all roses. What challenges did you end up facing, and specifically, what were the ones that you maybe you didn't see coming that you look back on now and you're like, wow, that was a hard thing that I had to deal with.
Yeah, probably, several items come to mind that are just part of, businesses, and probably not even specific to actuarial firms. But one of the items is always the idea of garnering efficiency, right? And so thinking of where the work needs to be done, and in a lot of cases, right, utilizing both folks that sit here in the US and that also sit outside the US. And so part of that is then helping the rest of the folks, right, understand that trajectory, and then ultimately how they fit into the success of that too. So it's helping to develop different skill sets. I think as, when you and I started our careers, right, my first year was truly like plowing through data analytics and collecting the thousands of lines of data, and getting that program through the system. And our analysts aren't doing that today, right? Or nor were they back then. So it's an evolution. I think, the next round of this that we'll probably all are in at the moment is AI, but it's always kind of helping all of those advancements that are garnering more efficiency and change, but then helping people be able to adapt and go along with that.
No, that's great. Okay, so you're in this retirement business leader role for a number of years, um, but recently you've changed roles again, moving from strictly being a pension actuary to now being an investment consultant. I'd love for you to just walk us through like what led you to pursue this change. What are you learning from this change? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting because you don't always have to maybe leave an employer to pursue a new role. And so I do think that, right, first and foremost, that might be something to think about, right? If anyone is thinking about ever changing a role, then maybe your company would actually support that. And so for me, that was the case. But investments, maybe similar to actuarial, it actually went back to way earlier than in my career as a passion, versus when I actually started practicing more and more in that side of the business. So earlier on, I was doing my actuarial analyst job, but then also looking for opportunities to do things that involved investments. So got involved in a number of items in terms of like risk analytics on clients, and got to do some work that did move more into the investment side of this, which led me also to pursue my FSA in the investment track. And that was certainly not the easiest path to get my FSA, since it was not the clear path that I was practicing in. And so it definitely took me a longer time probably to get my FSA. But I'm so glad I did it, because I was able to really kind of dive into the basics of that, really was able to use that studying to help that skill set that I knew I did want to utilize more and more one day, um, which is probably a good overall lesson, and one that I try to continue to balance, and try to coach other people on balancing, which is not everything that you're doing today and in the moment is going to equate to, right, a short-term success metric, right? Whether that's a promotion or a raise or a bonus, some things that you do is for a longer term career trajectory. So that was probably one for me, was taking my FSA and that investment path. It built a solid base. And then when the opportunity came and the time was right, I was then actually able to make that transition and move over into that part of the business.
That's interesting. That is one thing I did not know about you, that you got your FSA on the investment track. But I think what you're sharing there is so insightful. Just that just because you're on a track doesn't mean that you can't broaden your horizons. Like even if you stayed as a pension actuary, strictly as a pension actuary, having that background, that foundation was surely going to be beneficial.
Absolutely, for sure.
And you mentioned you went on and got your CFA, right?
I am actively pursuing my CFA, so I've taken a few of the exams. I have one more additional one to still take. So again, yeah, it's been another item that I was just interested in pursuing more exams, I guess. As actuaries, we just love our exams. So yeah, that's the next part of my path, is hopefully continuing on the CFA exam track.
But do you know what I find interesting about that? And you and I are similar in that I went and pursued my CFA as well. Um, but there is something about having to study and be tested on material. In some ways, it's a great excuse to dive into something, right? It gives you some purpose and some structure for doing that. Like I think about people that I've known that have, as an example, gone on and got their SEBS designation as an actuary, right? Just because they want to understand a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of benefits in general and compensation in general, and some of the rules around that. And there's really no better way to do that. Especially, I think you're right. Actuaries, I think, just get wired that way. That, well, if you want to learn something, you go pursue a credential for it. You take tests, you study material, and that's how you do it. It's a good excuse at a minimum, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I have found that with the actuarial exams, now with the CFA exams, I truly do enjoy the learning process. And again, it doesn't on every exam, at least for me, has not translated into an immediate pass all the time. But yeah, just kind of getting the knowledge and the materials is so incredibly valuable in terms of then what we do in the day-to-day
Mm-hmm.
basis of, serving clients or working on portfolios.
But yeah, some of it is just having that base level understanding, right? And
Mhm.
that's hugely beneficial, depending on your role and your responsibilities. And so I no, I think that's great. Um, Looking back, right? You've been doing this for about 20 years now. If you could go back and give your younger actuarial self some advice based on what you've experienced and what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I think it's still what I would tell myself today, which is it is okay to fail and learn from those failures that you have. And
Did you always believe that?
I did not always believe that. And I would say, kind of part of that growth is, when you fail, whether it's in the professional or even on an exam, it's very emotional, right? It's hard. I think we work in a profession where everyone's a superstar and everyone is so smart and talented that we have a really high bar and we hold a high bar for ourselves. So I do think, failures tend to hurt. But then once I started realizing is, you look back and say, oh, I went through this experience and it helped me grow or, learn and evolve or maybe change a way that I was doing something. What I started to see is I was always looking back on the things that didn't go well that actually truly helped me evolve into the person, the actuary that I became. And so that is something that I've started to look at. And I say I would still tell myself that today because I hate to fail. Um, and I hate to not do something or have it not go right. Um, so it is still something that, is a constant item to focus on, at least for me. And then once maybe the emotions of the situation are able to settle, then you can truly kind of reflect and learn from it. Because if you fail and don't learn from it, then there's nothing to garner out of that. But if you can kind of look back and think about it and change or maybe decide not to change if you thought that everything that was done correctly, I think both of those are very valuable lessons to learn.
Absolutely. Any other advice you'd give your younger self?
Um, any other advice? Well, I would say I do think the other advice that is important to have is balance with work and the profession. And the way I phrase it is I think I'm a better worker when I have balance. Because then when I'm at work, I'm very motivated, dedicated, focused, and a lot of that has to do with having that time to, as you kind of mentioned, some of my items with family and traveling that kind of bring you that joy in life. That it does help to then push you that when you're at work, that you're just giving it your all.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I'm sure those messages too, as you experience these and you deal with them, I'm sure that's extremely valuable as you work with your daughter on just because growing up and dealing with some of these same things. And I mean, we all want that as parents, right? I have my three boys, and we all want them to be better than how we were and be able to hopefully overcome some of the challenges, even if they're self-imposed.
Yeah, I find it funny sometimes now when I, try to teach her something about life or school or friends. And then I pause after I do that and say, oh, I should actually think about that for myself as well too.
Yeah, it's that's always a trick for sure. Um, all right, so given your experiences so far in your career, and obviously you've had some leadership opportunities that you've taken advantage of, the way you've expanded your horizons on the investment side, um, what advice do you have for others that might be considered taking on different roles in their career, right? If there's somebody thinking about it going, I think I might like this, but I'm not sure what to do. Like, what do you tell them?
Yeah, I think exploring is always very important, right? So, if you're feeling that there's something that you want to do, absolutely go and explore that. Find others that might be doing that. What you will find is generally there's a lot of people that if you communicate that you have something that you're interested in, whether you want to go for it right away or just start exploring what that means, there's a lot of people that will be able to then kind of mentor you, coach you, and even be an advocate for you perhaps one day as you're going to that, explore that. So I do think that's important that if there is something, um, definitely take action and try to think about it. And then I would balance that with probably sometimes you have to be patient as well too. So if you want a role, doesn't mean it's available perhaps tomorrow. But maybe there's a build-up process and you kind of think about it, understand what it is, get your advocates in line, and then there's probably a path that then you could create that would make sense to try to achieve your goal.
I like that. I think that's solid advice, especially the part about like finding those people that you can talk to about it. If you have those aspirations, even if it's to say, "Hey, I want to try something new, and here's some areas where I think I'd want to try something new," just articulating that to somebody that can help influence or steer you in the right direction is so important. You keep that stuff to yourself, and I think the likelihood goes down that you end up being able to try it. So I
Mhm.
really like that. And then there's a book, we've talked about this in some of our leadership development community TED Talk podcast clubs, but it's a book that I really like called Designing Your Life. And they talk about this concept that you're more or less explaining called prototyping, where it's like if you want to try something new, you start building a prototype for it. Well, how would I do this? Where could I basically how could I dip my toe in the water with this without having to fully commit, but start to get some experience and exposure there. And I think that's extremely useful. I've tried to adapt that in my own life, and there's been some things where I thought I would have an interest, and it's like I want to get involved in this, and so I found an opportunity to get involved with it, and in short order found that, oh no, I really actually don't want to do this. This does not bring me joy. This does not bring me energy. I'm glad I tried it and I didn't fully commit, and so I love that advice. I think it's so useful, and I think people need to get more comfortable with just trying to find those little things where they can start to explore and experiment. And I think what people don't realize too is that those opportunities are probably more abundant than what they think.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think sometimes there's just a little hesitation and it's hard because it's sometimes you're communicating that you want to change, and it may be to the person that you're working with every single day. And so I do think thinking through, right, how that message is, how you're trying to achieve that is important. And then having
Mhm.
just that empathy in terms of what it might mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about another part of probably the balance that you have professionally, which is volunteering. So you've been volunteering with the Conference of Consulting Actuaries for several years now. You're currently serving on the board, along with being on several committees and task forces. I'd love for you to talk to our audience about your experience volunteering at this stage in your career.
Yeah, I do find volunteering and all of my volunteering work professionally is with the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. And it has just been a really great overall organization to, I'll say, be able to volunteer with. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of different aspects to that. So my first experience was speaking at an enrolled actuaries conference many years ago, and just being able to kind of just be a speaker. I think I spoke on lump sum projects within pension plans, and just being able, that was also my first CA meeting I've ever attended. And so it just kind of opened my eyes to, oh, this is great. I love the aspect of kind of being able to prepare for a meeting, getting to work with folks that I probably normally would not have, at other firms on a topic that's relevant to actuaries. So it was really interesting. And then from that, actually got involved in the Enrolled Actuaries Conference Planning Committee. So then being the one that helped, set the topics for the meeting, recruit the speakers, and then it developed more from there because I think, once you start that volunteer, once you kind of like flex that muscle, it becomes a little bit easier to kind of just keep it going and put yourself out there for more ideas and getting involved in various ways. So working with the women in consulting community that we have, and we just did a session at the annual meeting with some wonderful women that were able to, speak on relevant topics on that side. So that's been a great volunteer part of the community. And then, of course, more recently joining the board of directors as well too, and getting involved that way.
So you're obviously in a busy stage of your career, just kind of where you're at professionally, the things that you're doing, the roles that you're taking on. Is volunteering worth it?
I definitely think it's worth it. 100%. Yeah. No hesitation on that. It is definitely worth it. And I think as long as, yes, you can find that balance, right? Because there's a lot of priorities, a lot of things pulling you, and just finding what works for you individually, is probably also something that anyone would want to keep in mind.
So you mentioned that kind of your first foray into volunteering was speaking at an EA conference, a conference you had never attended before yourself. And so now you're going to speak at it. Like, how scary was that walking into that opportunity, and why did you decide to take that plunge and say I'm going to just jump in and do this, even though got no experience with it? And yeah, talk to us a little bit about that. I think that'd be interesting to hear.
I like the term scary you use because I do remember going into that. It was so much scarier than going into a client meeting. And because I knew the audience was so smart. And not that a client audience isn't smart, but in a different way, right?
It's
They
different way.
know
Yeah, I was gonna say you're the expert when you're in there with a client, right? You're supposed to be the
exactly.
smartest person in the room. And it's different when
Exactly.
you're in front of your peers who you're like, I know there's people in this audience that know this stuff better than I do.
That's exactly right. So kind of going into that, if I would have, because my paper printout of that presentation, I think I had 1,000 notes on it, and was trying to think of any question that might come up from the audience. And it was just very interesting, but it did have a little bit of scariness to it, kind of going in for the first time. But once I did it, then I think I got the confidence that I was able, to be okay at it, and then be able to continue to do that. So I would say it's okay if it is scary. I think, anytime we do something new, that's probably a natural emotion that we'll feel. Uh, but it doesn't mean you can't do it.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I probably should say I was presumptuous in assuming it was scary. I was reflecting on my own experiences there in that same type of environment, walking into something for the first time, speaking at a meeting in front of peers as opposed to in front of a client. And it is a little bit terrifying because, like you said, you're worried. At least for me, I was worried that somebody was going to come to the microphone and ask me a question, and I was going to say, I have no idea, even though I'm the one speaking at the session that I'm supposed to be educating other people.
Yes, exactly.
And I think what I've learned from that is that, first of all, the likelihood of that happening is low, and it's nice that you're not the only speaker. There's usually multiple people speaking at a session, and you can always defer to others. And if nobody knows, then you're all in the same boat, and it's not as bad.
Then hopefully someone in the audience will know.
And that's true. They tend to be very collaborative. I think that's the one thing that I really appreciate about these CCA meetings is that it becomes more of a group effort rather than, one person is not going to be looked at as the solo expert on any topic, frankly, that we're speaking on. So, no, I like that. You brought up the women in consulting community, and you're on the steering committee for that. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that community, why it exists, what type of activities and events the community produces. You mentioned the session that the community put on at the CCA annual meeting recently, which I had an opportunity to sit in on, and thought was excellent. But talk to us a little bit more about that community.
Yeah, so the ultimate purpose of that community being formed is really just to have a forum that's going to help promote the growth, the development, particularly of women in the actuarial profession. And even though it is focused, maybe on the growth of women, it is a community that is so important for both men and women to be a part of. And just from statistics alone, our industry is heavier men than women. So we do tend to what I would call be, more of the minority, perhaps in a meeting, maybe in a company. So I just think it's a nice environment that is able to just kind of go down and talk about, maybe some of the items that, we as women might come across that maybe is just different than the general population. So, some of the items that we do are speaking, whether it's at the annual meeting or the Enrolled Actuaries Conference, and try to just do a little bit of a forum. Yeah, so we will try to host, special get-togethers at the annual meeting or the Enrolled Actuaries Conference. Over the past 2 years, we've done book clubs where we do a multi-week reading of different books that are focused either on women in leadership or we pick confidence. This year's theme is being bold. So yeah, just trying to get a little creative in terms of ways that we can kind of approach the women in the actuarial profession.
What kind of response have you seen from other women within the profession to some of the events that you've all done?
I think very, very favorable. And just thinking about the session that was at the annual meeting that we had the panel of women, and what I heard just in comments is how appreciative people are of just hearing other women's stories within the profession and hearing, whether it was challenges or successes that they've gone through. It just can be very relatable and adaptable and almost just a very nice way. And then it allows networking growth as well too. So then you get a chance to meet other women in the profession that maybe have had similar experiences that you're going through.
No, I wholeheartely agree from that, and even from a man's perspective, right? Sitting in on these things, like I've learned personally things that issues that women have faced that I just was not cognizant of. Right. And when you hear some of these, some people's experiences and stories and the things that are just on women's minds as it relates to their profession and their jobs, it can be very eye-opening and helpful, especially as when I've had opportunities to manage other women. Like there are certain things that I will do differently from having just listened in on some of these conversations through the events that the community has put forward. So I'm really appreciative of it for one.
Yes, we love having female and male attendees at all of our events.
No, it's great. All right, so just to round out our discussion on volunteering, so what advice do you have for actuaries regarding volunteering, regardless of where they're at in their career?
I would say if any part of you is interested in volunteering, that to just take a baby step forward on that front. Sometimes you don't have to jump all the way into the deep end, but there are ways that even in small ways that you can start getting involved in the profession, and maybe it grows from there. But it allows you to, test it out, do something. Speaking is, I think, a great way in as a volunteer and helps kind of open your eyes just in terms of some of that. So I would say if there's any small level of interest there, highly recommend trying it out.
No, I 100% agree. And like I said, I think that's true for someone who's um, relatively new in their career up to somebody who's extremely experienced. I've talked with people on both ends of the spectrum that get involved with volunteering, and while they take away different things, they on both ends of the spectrum, they come away saying, "Oh, this was great. I'm learning so much from this. I'm, like you said, I'm getting to interact with other people that I wouldn't otherwise, and I'm learning from that." And that experience alone for some people is more than worth it.
Yeah.
more than worth the time and effort. So, well, this is our leadership development podcast, and so I do want to spend a few minutes talking about your views on leadership, and specifically when you think about people that you consider to be successful leaders. I'd love for you to explain to us, like, what traits do these people have? How do they demonstrate their leadership? Like, what do you see as what makes a successful leader?
I think the first and foremost item that is necessary to have a strong leader is trust. So just having someone that is just going to be very transparent and just very trustworthy is important. So, right, if you're looking to have a group of people kind of doing what someone's saying or driving the ship in the direction, that you really need to trust then that person that you're following. And so I think that's key, as well as passion. So, you having someone that truly is right driving to achieve the goals, right? If someone's asking me to work hard, I want to see them work hard. And so I do think that that's something that's very important as well, too, that, everyone's really trying to give in their all. And so you kind of see that, you feel it, and it makes you want to work for it as well, too. And then I think that needs to balance with empathy, right? Kind of going back to some of the first things we talked about on the people side. So at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and we all come to work and we work a lot and we put in a lot of effort, but we are people, and I think that's an important component as well, just to kind of reflect on that and just make sure that we are treating each other just in such a way that is important, has a kindness to it. And right, I think that goes a long way in terms of getting a team engaged, and again, building a culture within an organization.
No, I love all three of those points: trust, passion, empathy. Okay, I want to turn the trust piece around on you, because um, I want to know, how did you build trust with the team that you were leading when you were the retirement business leader there in your office?
So I think building trust, right? So in leadership, there are times when something that is not a message that the broader organization might know, right? So there is that. The way I always approach a situation of that is, you can be transparent, but that doesn't mean that you need to share all of the information that, it might be more confidential or sensitive. And so I think for me, that was the balance, that you were never going to say something that wasn't true, but maybe you couldn't say it, and that was okay. And so I do think messaging, right, communication, it's everything that we do. That's how I think trust is really built to, that, you're going to hear a message, you're going to understand the message. You might understand the limitations of the message that's being communicated,
Mhm.
but you certainly know you're not hearing anything that's not kind of genuine.
I like that. It's funny how much communication matters in building trust, right? Because I think I agree with all the points that you've laid out there. Being able to be straightforward with people, tell them what you know, tell them that there are things that you can't share, even just because they're a confidential nature. Um, but when people know that, like, you're being open and honest with them, even when it's stuff that you can't share, it's amazing what that does in building trust. I've seen that from being the person that has the information to being the one that is being told, hey, I want to talk to you about this, but I can't. And
Mhm.
I need you to just trust me on this. But the fact that they were open and honest with that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. It is really important. And I think that's too when you're the listener as a leader as well too. And so you do want to have, an environment where people will be open with you. Now, certainly if an employee were to ever share something they needed to be told, right, beyond, then that's a different story, of course. And
Hmm.
I would be very open and say that, of, you just told me something, as a supervisor leader, I can't not do something about this, right?
Hmm.
But then also fostering an environment where there is, some ability for your employees to be open and honest as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. All right. When you think about our profession, the actuarial profession, what do you view are the imperatives for someone that is looking to be a successful leader going forward?
Yeah, so I do think it's probably everything we just talked about with then the layer of you have to believe in yourself as well as that leader too. So, if you're trying to garner folks to, be part of your team and help grow that team, well, you better believe in your own message and what you're trying to do. So I think that that's super important, and having kind of that humble confidence in terms of, achieving that objective and being that leader.
Oh, I like that. I think that also involves just tying it to some other things we've talked about, being able to take risks, right? They don't have to be, I mean, you don't have to put it all on black, right? But you do need to take calculated risks here and there, and find those opportunities. I think especially if it's something you're uncomfortable with, finding those low risk opportunities to where you can start to, whether it's build a new skill or take on a new role or things like that, that can help you gain that confidence, right? That
Mhm.
you need to be able to take the next step.
Yes. And this is where finding people within your network that can also attribute to help building that confidence is very valuable too, which then links back to other than within your company, a great way to build networks in the profession is probably by volunteering too. So
Yeah,
yeah, we're,
it's
we're
very,
coming full circle.
we are. It's funny how these things they do that though, right? I mean, I love our conversation today, and I love how you've hit on a lot of this stuff because I do think that there's a lot for people to learn here on how to be successful, in navigating their own career and building their own self confidence and being able to mold themselves into the person that they want to be, and that's going to look different for every person, and that's okay too, right? You don't have to follow somebody else's path. But I think it's so valuable for people to hear experiences like yours, Jess, where you've had a different career path than some, right? You've had other opportunities. You've taken on things, at various stages of your career. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on that because I know it'll help other people realize that, oh, maybe I can do something different here as well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. It was very nice to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, no, this is great. And appreciate you, like I said, sharing your own experiences. So I want to thank my guest, Jes Kachur, for joining us today. Jess, if people want to connect with you and follow what you're up to, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so anyone can feel free to email me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I do try to keep tabs on both of those.
And I would probably venture a guess too that if people were interested in hearing more of some of your perspectives, joining the Women in Consulting community, which is an open community within the CCA, so any actuary can join. That would be another way for people to be able to network and hear directly from you and other women within the profession.
Absolutely. Would love to have anyone reach out to me on that aspect.
Excellent. And um, so I want to encourage people to like and subscribe to this podcast to help us share stories like Jess's that can help benefit the actuarial community. And the leadership development community, very much like the women in consulting community, is an open community within the CCA, meaning it's open to any actuary. You can reach out to the CCA and request to join. I want to thank Shannon Peterson of CCA staff for helping to produce today's event. Join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and on our website. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And thanks again, Jess, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.